Yeah, it's just wide.
Oh, no, it is. Okay. So we're going to look today at...
You see that?
I can now, thank you, love. So do you mind scrolling down, and we're going to look at Nelson. Voila. So Nelson, when we look at the map in a minute, Nelson lies just over the ranges from Marlborough. So I think that it's kind of it's always overshadowed. There's some amazing history there, and there's amazing producers and amazing wines made. But because it's so much smaller in terms of profile, that I think sometimes we forget that it does make some lovely wines. So again, it's only making 2% of the production of New Zealand wine, and I think that this, as we'll see when we get to the map of New Zealand, is really quite there's two kind of completely distinctive regions. So we'll scroll down and then we'll have a look. Okay, so when you look here, where you see so you've got it there, and I mean these blue marks on the map are the region of Nelson. So obviously there aren't vineyards all over the place. If you get to the very top of that blue kind of curvy bit there, then you're up into the Abel Tasman National Park. So one of the beautiful spots of New Zealand, but clearly nobody grows grapes up there. So when you look at it, where on that, let me see if I can get rid of that thing that says no, I can't. Where in the bottom corner it says Richmond, and you can start to see the mountains, then they're the Richmond Ranges. So that you have to sort of go up and over, and then you would be into Marlborough. So that's the dividing line, if you like. So the basically the Nelson and Blenheim share the they sort of fight over who is the sunniest and who is the warmest of the sort of cities within New Zealand. And if you look at where the town of Nelson is situated, then in the top left-hand corner, you'll see the words Mount Arthur Range. So those ranges there, with our predominant weather system coming across from Australia, so that sort of shelters a lot of Nelson from kind of the inclement weather that can tend to come from across the Tasman. So when you look at it there, you see Motueka is up at the top, and then the Kinner Peninsula, and then down, and then you see the Waimea Plains. So, and then Nelson's actually much bigger than Blenheim. I always think that Blenheim's ginormous because obviously all the wine tends to come from there. But in terms of sort of the city and the infrastructure and everything else, Nelson is much bigger. It's a bigger port, so they've got lots of the forestry and trees and bits and pieces would be exported directly from Nelson. But I always feel it's like where people go. It's like a giant retirement home. I should stop saying that, shouldn't I? Because people kind of look at me funny. But my husband's like, you know, do you want to move out of Auckland? I'm like, Nelson would be the last place on God's earth that I wanted to go, because it's full of sort of people of my age who want to go and be in the sunshine or sort of scoot about on mobility scooters. And that's really, I'm hoping I'm some years away from that yet. But people go because they think it's so lovely. So if we could just scroll down to the next one, David, because that's more of an in-depth picture so we can look at it properly. Perfection itself. So, we've all gone fuzzy for a minute. So Nelson's the city that you see there up on the right-hand side. It's kind of sheltered in the Tasman Bay. And then there are two distinctive regions. So you've got the Waimea Plains, which are down kind of with sort of bright water. Richmond would kind of sort of bracket, if you like, that region. Then you start to go up into the Moutere Hills, which is sort of up on the left-hand side. So the Moutere Hills would be where a lot of German people moved from Germany, and they sort of established orchards up in the Moutere Hills. They established hops, so they were brewers first and foremost. So I think even now, if you go or you're a devotee of the kind of craft beer, then there are some hops that come from Nelson, with the Moutere hops, which are really distinctive. So when you get that kind of IPA, APA kind of character, and you get that really strong passion fruit, almost Sauvignon Blanc-esque, makes them very dry, the wines, and they will be the hops that come from the region there. So they're exported all over the world. So you could go to Oregon or wherever else and go to a craft brewery, and they will make a feature of having those hops there. So that was kind of what they start off as, a sort of super old. I think the oldest pub in New Zealand. I might have just made that up, but I'm sure it was up in the Moutere Hills. So the hills are full of clays, so they're sort of slightly denser, excellent water retention from up there. So if you saw people like Newdorf, who are probably the leading producer of Nelson wine, they're based up there. So things like their Pinot Noir, their Chardonnay, they make, beautiful aromatics. Well, obviously the cost of production. I always say this to my students: if you have to think, why do people make the styles of wine that they do? So if you're planting on hills, or on viticulture that's much harder to do, then obviously that's going to come at a price. So unless you can claw that back again in the final cost of the bottle, then there's not really very much point. So to viticulture up in the Moucherie Hills, you are getting kind of presence and fleshiness and richness and what have you, but that obviously comes as an expense. So there's some really, as I said, there's some beautiful wines coming out of there. Just as an aside, so if you go up to Motueka, and then further north of that, we would call them, I think, in New Zealand, the alternative lifestylers. So that's very, very divisive during COVID, because that has a sort of a magnet for people who didn't want to be vaccinated, but they're sort of up in the sort of slightly fringe kind of people who live, but it's super beautiful up there, but they're north of Motueka. When you come down the Kinner Peninsula, Kinner are the big sea urchins that you get in New Zealand. They're sort of like spiky, and then the Kinner themselves look like they're sort of like a mustard coloured, a really distinctive character. I mean, I didn't think I'd like them, but did. But they're a very love them or loathe them kind of character. So I'm presuming that's what that was named after. And there are a number of wineries that are there, but they tend to be, without saying disrespectful, they're the sort of lovely ones. You would go out for the day and you'd go and sit by the beach, or it will be sunny, and there's probably a very nice cellar door or restaurant or something like that. So there are a number along that peninsula there, which is sort of cheery and fun. But I wouldn't necessarily argue they made the greatest wines in Nelson, but not everybody wants great wine, do they? Sometimes people want to go out and have a fun time, nice meal, and sit and look at the sunshine. So maybe that's there as well. The Mapua, which you just that little dot there, Mapua, there's a smokehouse there. So if you like fish, or should I say smoked fish, that's the place to go. So that's the super famous, famous within New Zealand, I suppose, will be Mapua, which will be there. If you come then back into the Waimea Plains, is yet another example of the New Zealand, the hills are behind you, and then the rivers are all flowing down towards the sea, and with them they're bringing alluvial matter, which has been washed down over long periods of time, and then as the state hillside levels off before it gets into the sea, then the river slows down, and then it starts to sediment out all of the material that it's carrying. So the Waimea Plains are where you would tend to find some of the kind of, when I say bigger producers, the ones who are probably not so much focused on longevity or structure or tannin profile, but maybe slightly more forward or brighter. Or I'm not saying for a moment they're not delicious wines, but they would probably lack the structure of some of the other wines that are up in the hills. So on the Waimea Plains, you would see people like Seyfried, and I also always have an absolute soft spot for the Seyfried family, because they kind of legendary for if they need something, they just build it, apparently. So they don't buy anything. It's they don't want to do that. So if they need a tank, they kind of make it themselves. If they need a piece of machinery, Herman Seyfried, who's their father, who must be, wow, 85, 95, that's right, 50, 40. Oh, he must be coming up in his mid-70s by now. Apparently hates having to spend money, so just, decides to build it. A friend of mine told me that when he worked there, they riveted together a tank, and he had to wear, I think he said, cotton wool in his ears, then he had earplugs, and he had noise cancelling, not what noise cancelling, what workers, tradesmen use with the big plastic things, and he had a hood on. He had a towel wrapped around his head, and then he had a blanket maybe over the top, because he had to stand inside the tank while Herman knocked the rivets through it. Apparently, it's simply deafening. But they built it themselves. So you've got to take your hat off to him and the second generation, the children, Anna and Chris, are making the wine there now. So, they make awesome wine. They often will win a trophy in a wine show. They make a beautiful sparkling wine and Gewürztraminer and Chardonnays and Sauvignons. And I think probably their most expensive wine is a sparkling wine, which is something like $39. So their old Coach Road and their normal labels are delicious wines, and they're under $20. So how can they afford? How can they achieve that price point? Would be, as you can see, some degree of mechanization. It's on a plain, free draining soils, plenty of sunshine because we're in Nelson. Rainfall, which will be never in short supply in New Zealand, not really anyway. That's how they drive the kind of styles of wine that are there. So because it's overshadowed slightly by Marlborough, then you see yourself thinking, well, things like Sauvignon Blanc, they would make heaps and heaps of it there. And it's kind of the same, kind of cold ferment, bright, breezy Sauvignon Blanc. So there's some really delicious stuff comes out of Nelson. If you look around, there's lots of little other bits. So in Brightwater, there is, oh my goodness, that's gone out of my mind entirely. I'll have to think about it. It was so lovely that I remember I just played with a little dog when I got there for hours on end because he was so cute. And now Greenhoff, sorry, that's right. So he makes lovely wine there. So there are often people sort of dotted about making, good wines. But I would say apart from maybe the Newdorf people, Judy and Tim, and now their daughter Rosie has taken over. They'd be the leaders with their sort of impressive Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays, and they've been joined. They've got some Riesling there and aromatics, but it's a kind of region that really is attractive. But as I say, the land's expensive. There's lots of orchards there, lots of fruit produced there. They had a couple of catastrophic hail instances not so long ago. So one was on Boxing Day and just stripped all of the soft fruits from there. So land is, land for agriculture. You're always in that. Well, it might be the same in Australia, but in New Zealand, there's always a big tussle between people who are making crops. So in central, cherries fetch way more money per hectare than grapes do, and there's always, whenever land becomes available, then often the cherry producers will whip in quickly because I think they get something like $300,000 a ton because the cherries are so desirable on the export market. But do you mind having a look further down? It's a kind of interesting place, but there's not tons to say about it. So Sauvignon Blanc there, I'd be disappointed if there wasn't the last line, the 20 varieties. We can't decide what they are. So there's, as I say, that will be so I say Sauvignon. Most Sauvignon is going to come off the Waimea Plains because obviously that's what we want to make Sauvignon. We're looking for kind of high tons, so we're not so much bothered about concentration. Obviously, we want to have flavour and aroma, but if you were going to choose it, then you would plant. Sauvignon is quite a price-sensitive wine, so you need to be able to make sure you've got plenty of it. Cropping at a decent level. Maybe the flat is best for you. So Pinot Noir, the aromatics, Pinot Gris, really, really delicious Chardonnays. And then the other varieties, wow, there's just everything. So there'll be Pinot Blanc. Somebody's got Dolcetto there's a chap called Trevor who has a wine called Trevor's Red. Waimea Estates, I think that's his. And he would be, someone who's got absolutely everything but the kitchen sink planted. I think there's some Viognier coming out there. There's some Gewürztraminer. There's kind of a bit of everything coming out of Nelson, to be honest with you. But it's kind of a fun place. I think probably you're all, judging by the look of you, all much too young to go and live there. But it's a nice place to visit if you want to be sunny and fun, or you can go up into the Abel Tasman and canoe and, do the long walk that takes you back down. I think it's like 3 or 4 days from top to bottom. I did it for a day, and that's enough for me. But it is really quite.
Which walk is that, Jane?
It's called the Abel Tasman. So you can.
Okay.
So you go from, you get you can get a transfer from Nelson, or you can drive. So there's a place called Kaiteriteri, and you can. Well, I got on a boat, to be honest with you, because I thought I'm not blinking walking all that way and back again. And the little boat chugs all the way up the coastline to the top. So you can either go to the very top and then go all the way through the forest and down, or you can get off at it stops 3 or 4 times on the way up and get off, and then you can walk down through it. But it is absolutely glorious. But yeah, the Airport Tasman, there's a couple of lodges there. Super lovely place. So that's the little picture in case anyone. You see Sauvignon Blanc. Once we've started now to move into the South Island, then we'll see Sauvignon at the top of the South Island becoming so utterly delicious. So yeah, so the climate, well, I've just said it, protected by the mountains southeast and west, so it's kind of in that basin. That's why. So you've got the Richmond Ranges, you've got Mount Arthur on the left-hand side, but again, you would have slightly more rainfall because obviously you've only got one mountain range to get into Nelson, whereas if you go to Marlborough, you've got 1, 2 going, and you get the Kaikoura Ranges are sort of pushing any weather systems back out to, well, they push them across the Cook Strait and into Wellington, to be honest with you. Oh my goodness, it's always good as it comes up and like, phew, that's exactly what I said. So as I said, the Waimea Plains and then the Moutere, which are those heavier soils. I'm not a big fan of these regional things because these Fraven Complex, rich cherry and plum. I always think it's slightly disrespectful to shoehorn the whole region's Pinot into a couple of sentences, but I would say anything from the Waimea Plains. If you go to Nelson, you don't spend very much money, then you're probably getting that lighter cherry-ish, maybe not so much oak on them, fruity $20-25 bottle of wine. You really want to get into the upper Moutere, so slightly heavier soils, so things like, as I said, the Neudorf wines would the best. The home block, Tom's block or whatever, they age magnificently. So they're sort of richer. There's something about them which will... Do you see much Nelson wine, David, over in Australia?
You get a bit on premise than in retail, but there is definitely why Nelson wine's about.
Okay. So we went out for dinner last night. I nearly wept. The price of the food and the alcohol, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, people in Sydney must be like billionaires. I looked down the wine list, I was like, oh, I was sweating. It was so expensive. But anyway, I wasn't paying, but I could not pay. Even though I wasn't paying, I couldn't possibly have justified ordering the steak, which was $70. I'll say it again, $70. Is that normal? $70. You can buy a cow for $70. I had my glasses on. I was like, that cannot be the price. And they were full. So clearly, people here are, as I say, plenty of money. But whoosh, I thought that was super on the Sydney side of me. Yeah. Oh, blimey, O'Reilly. Right. Let's march on, and then we can get to voila. So you're looking there. So when we talk in a minute about the Awatere, then that's the picture that you would see. So it's a completely distinct region from what we would call Marlborough proper, which is back over with the hills. So you see that range of mountains in the background. So I can never remember the name of it. I don't want to offend Maori people by getting it wrong, but the range that you'll see in some of the photos, if we pop one in, then that's where Edmund Hillary practiced. He obviously climbed Mount Cook, but apparently he used to whip up and down the mountain in the background, as a sort of precursor to going to have a go at Everest. So, but it doesn't take, that you can see it's normally snow covered most of the year round, so that would be at the back. But Blind River is down in that new it's not new anymore, but in the kind of distinct sub region from the rest of Marlborough. So this I had to put on because I love it so much. So to the blend of it, so when we talk about the development of Marlborough, Justice Beattie was he ended up being the Governor General, but there was a sort of the people who planted vineyards in Montana had a kind of a photo opportunity in the 70s, and they kind of celebrated it, and somebody had a shovel, I think, and it was whatever, But I adore that when the mayor says the Blaine Vineyards get hold of Montana's PR man because they bought all the land under the name Cloudy Bay Vineyards, and he was like, "That's a dreadful name. Let's call it Blenheim." Blenheim Vineyards it is, but obviously nowadays you think, well, if there's a instantly recognizable New Zealand brand on the overseas market, I think Cloudy Bay will be front of center. But I thought, wow, that just shows you maybe the mayor very good on mairing and maybe short on marketing now. But yeah, no, it was I thought that was a super thing. So why do we spend almost the whole lesson on Marlborough? Because it's so important for the New Zealand industry. If we didn't have Marlborough, we wouldn't have an industry. It's both a blessing and a curse. There's lots of soul searching going on at the moment about whether or not we're too reliant on Marlborough or we're too reliant on Sauvignon Blanc. There's definitely people who think all our eggs are in one basket, but then I don't think people go to other regions in older, more established. I mean, people don't sort of pitch up in, in Germany and say, well, is everyone going to be sick of Riesling or Bordeaux, and say, is everyone really sick of Cabernet Sauvignon or something like that? I think people are just now starting to realize that possibly they either need to hold on to what makes Marlborough special and emphasize it and protect it from what's happening overseas. But for now, it just has mushroomed to being this kind of monolithic region. And unfortunately, you see 81% of the total production of New Zealand comes out of Marlborough. And when you look down at the grape breakdown, then 80% of that region is Sauvignon Blanc. So, Pinot, there's obviously a lot of Pinot Noir grown there. Pinot Gris, again, that was one of our super exports, and Chardonnay making a strong thing. And then, I can't see because the bars in front of it, but it must say something like 20 other varieties or whatever. So there's a awesome couple called Therese and Hans Herzog, who have a winery in Blenheim, and I could almost name 20 varieties they do on their own. So they are super high end, but being Austrian, they've got Blaufränkisch, they've got you name it, Zweigelt, they're all over it. So they probably are responsible for 23 of the 28 grape varieties all by themselves. So when you look at it, and I've got a couple of extra slides on here, so we've got to sort of slightly twist your head a little bit and think to yourself, well, the Richmond ranges you can see up in that top left-hand corner, they're the ones that you would go up and over to get to Nelson. And I'm sure you saw when we had those terrible storms at the beginning of 2023 and at the end of the preceding year, where whole roads were just washed away. We've had massive problems with infrastructure because of the weather recently. And so there was a point when to get from Blenheim to Nelson should only have taken you about an hour, and now it was taking something like 4.5 hours because they had to go massively all the way around. So again, the last couple of years have been very interesting for New Zealand. So, we're a small country with lots of roads, which a lot of them haven't been very well maintained. So there was just a shocking realization that if you take out a major arterial road, because, the land just fell away. It wasn't a case of there was a pothole in it. It was a case of it all went. But anyway. So you've got the Richmond Ranges, which are up on that left-hand side, and then there is actually a place called Cloudy Bay. I just like to point that out. So it is actually, as I say, that's what they named their winery after. But you can see the Wairau, which is the top bit, the sort of alluvial soils. That would be kind of the sort of golden mile, if you like. So that the Wairau Valley again has brought all of the alluvial matter down from the Richmond Ranges, the hills, up towards St Arnaud. It's carried it down, and then these braided, ribboning rivers have dropped it. So the Wairau Valley tends to be those kind of free draining, stony soils, perfect for ripening Sauvignon Blanc. So I would say some of the most expensive land in Blenheim is in the Wairau Valley. So if you're looking for kind of quintessential ripe Marlborough Sauvignon of a certain quality level, that's where you would tend to source your fruit from. And there's definitely more of an exploration now of kind of regionality and sub-regionality within Marlborough, rather than just squash it all together. but my friend Emma, who did her Master of Wine dissertation on is there a case for sub-regional Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, it's a fascinating thing because some people say yes, that's how you get a more advanced that's how you get sort of gravitas, by pointing out to people you're not just a sort of amorphous wine, but there are loads of sort of sub-regions and bits and pieces. And there were people who said, don't be preposterous, people can hardly find New Zealand on the map as it is, so just call it Marlborough Sauvignon, have done with it. But there were lots of very polarized opinions. I think she interviewed about 100 people, kind of educators and journalists and whatever, importers, distributors, but it was quite interesting. And don't forget that most big Sauvignon Blanc brands would be multi-regional blend. So there's not very often you see a little bit of single vineyard stuff, but normally people try and come up with this big blend. They've done lots and lots of research. There's a lady called Wendy Parr, and they've done lots of those. They look a bit like a spider's web. So you have a glass, and then you have to say, well, I'm pulling the spider's web this way because I can smell tomato stalk, but I can't smell so much passion fruit. So I sort of push that bit in, but I can smell snow pea. So I pulled this out. Do you see? And then they layer them all up together. So if you go for one sub-region, you might get a flavor or aroma profile this way. But by layering it up and finding the grapes from a number of sub-regions, then you can get a kind of more complex wine as you do it. So Renwick, right? It apparently is Renwick. It's not Renwick, as I think it should be pronounced, but it's Renwick. Is kind of another. So Blenheim, and then you would drive in towards Renwick and stop for a pie. Big debate in Marlborough. So Renwick pies used to be the kind of reason for people almost going to Marlborough. But now was one that must have set up about 10 years ago called Burley Pies, and there's a sort of, Australia and New Zealand just sort of captured the market, haven't they, in being competitive for almost everything. So, sport looks second to pie competitions, but Renwick has gone for the sort of what I would call the classics, so the cheese and mince, the steak and cheese, that kind of look, and then Burley slightly more exotic, so the Chinese pork belly, name some other sort of slightly bohemian pie filling, and that's from down the road. So there's a reason if you go there, go to Renwick. So you've got the valley running this way, which is those alluvial soils, and then coming down what are called the Southern Valley. So they're the fingers that stick down through the word Southern Valley. So I've got a picture of them a little bit later on, but there are people have realized that on the slopes of those southern valleys are clay material. So there's definitely a movement now for some of the most prized Pinot Noirs to come from those southern valleys. So they've all got a slight character of their own. But you're tending to see more ripe tannins, more impactful kind of structured wines, more potential for development in bottle. Again, back to my discussion about the cost of things. So if you want to make inexpensive wine, flat, mechanized, easy to do. If you want to make something a little bit more profound, then you have to, unfortunately, bear the cost of hillside viticulture or what have you, but we'll look at those in a minute. And then where the word is on the right hand side that says Blenheim, obviously, if you go north of that, then the little road takes you all the way up to a place called Picton, and Picton is where you catch the ferry, and the ferry will then take you over to the North Island. So there's a sort of big port there. But again, because this is New Zealand, there was a massive storm. Well, there was a massive storm when I had booked to go and stay in the Marlborough Sounds, and then I remember sitting there thinking, well, this is glorious, isn't it? It's piddling down. There's no internet. It was one of those things meant to be romantic, and I said, Jonathan, we're frozen with no internet, no television, no method of communication. We can't go outside because it's literally sheeting down with rain. Anyway, didn't do that again. But so the Picton, you couldn't get from Picton into Blenheim, which is State Highway 1, the state highway that goes from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island. So that was all washed out at one point, but they kind of mended that, and then off they go again. But the main highway would go down to the right of Blenheim, and then it goes up and over those words you say that say the Wither Hills. So those are quite big hills that you see there are super dry in the summer, once those southerlies start blowing and kind of drying off all the grass. So they're really only good enough for growing sheep on them. But they form a natural division between what I would call the kind of heritage part of Blenheim, which is the Wyre and the Southern Valleys. You go up and over the Wither Hills, and then you would go down into, you can see there, it's called the Owateri Valley. So that's higher than the rest of Marlborough. It's much windier and it's much cooler. So the Owateri was planted, but I visited there on my first trip here, and there weren't very many vineyards planted there. But now, if you broke down all the regions in New Zealand, then the Owateri, I think, will be the second biggest region in New Zealand if it was on its own. So why have people gone there? Because it's much cheaper. It was much cheaper to buy land there than it was to buy it back into, the Wyre. You're looking maybe $250,000 a hectare for sort of primo planted vineyards in the Wyre. So the Owateri was just, people thought, oh, we may as well go there. That's kind of old riverbeds. So where you look now, where you see the little word Seddon, which is a little township there, thank you. The first plantings were to the right of that. They went all the way down to the sea. So the famous winery that will be out there will be Yealands. So Yealands, there was a massive falling out between Peter Yealand and he was part of Delegate, so he sort of stormed off in a huff, took all his money and sort of created his own winery. So they rather generous marketing. They say they're a single vineyard, but I think at the moment there's 1,100 hectares planted there. So I suppose you just have to define how big a single vineyard is. But they've got vineyards that literally, as you come on State Highway, you get to the little township of Seddon, and as you start to climb towards the sea, then there is just nothing but vineyards. They are all the way. It's extraordinary. You could drive for maybe 20 minutes until you get to the very edge of the sea, and they've been joined by other producers now. So there are lots of wines coming off there, where the little township is of Seddon, and then now there are plantings inland as well. So literally where the words Owateri Valley is, there are vineyards going in that way as well. So they're still classed as the Owateri. They're probably slightly more protected, so you get lots more of that slightly richer fruit character. When you've had Owateri wines, because the Sauvignons, again, you're much too young, the Sauvignons look like Sauvignons from New Zealand did maybe 30 years ago, when they were super, that kind of green capsicum, snow pea, cut grass kind of characters. Nowadays, people like that kind of richer guava, passion fruit, red capsicum kind of look, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the Owateri always got that slightly green, not herbal, because that makes it sound unripe, but there's always a much more lifted character to them. They're not as in your face. I think they're really awesome wines. They're beautiful wines from the Owateri. Pinots, I still have to be convinced, because you get that thread of coolness, so that sort of raspberry leaf lifted kind of character. And I think I can't say this, can you? When you listen to Mastering Wine, you have to forget everything you've learned. Well, apart from the exam, obviously, because I judged at decanter, and all of my MW friends, you kind of go to rooms, and there was one that said sort of Madeira 1850 to 1899, and the other one said sort of growers champagne, open brackets, vintage, and the next one said, white Burgundy, Premier, and Grand Cru. And at the end of the corridor, it said Owateri Pinot, £5 and under. And that was my room for the day. And I remember thinking, there's no God, is there? I'm stuck with a blooming raspberry leaf. All my chums kept coming out. They were like, whoa, those 1874 Madeiras are like sweet. And I'm like, I'm still drinking some sort of Neckley Pinot at £5. But I suppose, whatever. Right, if you don't mind scoofing down a little bit, David, then that's it. That's just a bigger picture of the same thing. You can see it. We always squint at the front. I forgot they have another one. So the mountains that you see to that left-hand side, in that sort of at 7 o'clock on that morning, they would be, from then on, you're kind of going into high country. So there's nothing after that. If you're 4-wheel drive, whatever, you can go that way. Most of the freight and goods traveling up and down New Zealand would go up and down that state highway. So I sound like a stuck record, I know, but don't forget Seddon had that massive earthquake not so long ago. So, that threw up the land. I can't remember. It sounded like 7 meters at some point. Just massive fault line running through Seddon. Which was quite scary. And again, the highway was stuck, so they had to kind of, everything stopped while we mended it. If you've only got one way up and down, the only other way to go from Christchurch is to go in and go through Hanmer, which will be another 8-hour trip to go all the way around. So we don't have any of the here in Australia, those big dual carriageway the highways that take you miles in about 5 minutes. We are nothing like that. That main highway is a single lane both ways. Boo-hoo. But anyway, so if you just pop down a little bit, Dave, that would be lovely. And I put this on because I thought it gives you a clue. So in 1999, so that's what, 24 years ago, the pink represents the vineyards. So if you look at that picture there, then the main so if you see where the town centre is, all the sort of dark bit there, okay, thank you, and then there's the main road that goes across the middle bit that you see there, that's Middle Renwick Road, so that goes out towards the airport, and then there's Upper Renwick and Lower Renwick Road. They're the three that you see in a line. So all of the vineyards at that point tended to be around that area there. So when you look in the sort of heritage vineyards, that's what the pink represents where they were. So 1999, really Aotearoa hardly registers at all. And then if you keep going down to the next one, so next year you see now we're starting to see more plantings going on. So people are still attracted to those flatter kind of alluvial soils because they're focused on Sauvignon. I mean, I think I mentioned it last week or maybe on week one. The story of Marlborough is that Hawke's Bay, if you think about it, if you go back in time, then the New Zealand wine industry is Auckland and Hawke's Bay. Auckland, because that's where most of the settlers came from, kind of Croatia. They kind of arrived into Auckland, sailed into Auckland en route to go and dig the Carry gum, and Northland must have got there and thought, yikes, there's nothing to drink, or we're not used to that, there's no European lifestyle here. Planted vineyards, made their own wines. You still had that strong they call them Dalmatian kind of people based in West Auckland who were making wine. They've obviously sort of slightly petered out, apart from Kumia River, because of the encroachment of suburbia. And then the Marist brothers has set up Mission Estate down in Hawke's Bay in the 1800s. And then I think we said last week that there were like 4 big breweries in Hawke's Bay. So you had really, that was where the centres of West Auckland and Hawke's Bay. And then the farmers who were wealthy in Hawke's Bay were kind of upset with the kind of the slightly more vocal viticulture, because they didn't want sprays, and people were, people growing grapes, so please don't spray near us, and spray drift and all this kind of thing. And they were really quite worried about it. And so when Montana, who's now Brancott Estate, so Montana was a wine company in New Zealand, used to be the biggest wine company in New Zealand, they said, where are we going to go and plant grapes? So they went to to Marlborough, didn't tell anyone what they were doing. So they went down there to buy fruit. And that's why that first quotation is because they went kind of undercover, didn't tell anyone what they were doing, bought all that. I think in 10 days they bought all the land that they thought they'd have a go at. And so they sort of zoomed down there, and they didn't want anyone to know what they were doing, because they didn't want lots of people complaining or dissuading them or whatever. And then it was only when it was all signed, sealed and delivered that they suddenly said, well, we're going to turn it into vineyards. And at that point they planted lots of the wrong things, so things like Cabernet Sauvignon, Muller Turgau, all the things that were wrong. But by 2000, then you could say to yourself, well, now we've already proved, when the first Marlborough Sauvignons must have come into London about 85 or 86. So by the year 2000 now, it's kind of established, people know what they're doing. So there's a sort of explosion. And so from 2000, then 2002. Now you're starting to see those, well, you're starting to see the development of the out area along the river. You see there, so some out towards the coast, but some in those more sheltered riverbank vineyards. So you've got Montana or Pernod Ricard's gone out there, Constellation's gone out there, we'll see there. And now you start to see up in Marlborough, if you like, the pink now starting to spread out and out and out. So the sort of density of planting in that kind of main area, the southern valleys are being explored. There's a movement. There's a place called Dillon's Point, which is right towards the coast. There's a sub-region happening there. And, you know, some of these bigger companies were looking for bigger vineyards. So they started to think, where can we possibly go? So that's 2002. So 2 years, really quite a lot of planting. And then I don't know when the next one is, David. I can't remember now. Hang on. Oh, by 3 years later, now we can hardly, you know, there's hardly anything. So the big area at the top, the black dot in the middle represents Renwick and then Marlborough. And now you're starting to see the massive plantings going in. So Villa Maria have got plantings in the out area, Yealands, Delegates, Constellation, Treasury, everyone is now down there as well, because they know that even if they're slightly getting those cooler characters from the out area, they can blend them back in and have those kind of regional blends. And what you're starting to see now is this movement up the Wairau River. So this is where, well, we'll see when we get to the next one. Sorry, but no, this is really quite scary. Well, I think it's quite scary anyway. So there, so 2010. Now, people would have said in the past that they would never have grown grapes up, you know, the Wairau River, almost off the map. That's a long way away. But you know, it's quite cool, the Upper Wairau. So you think to yourself, or somebody called them alpine, which would be another word for it, because it's not far on, you get to a ski field. But with things like frost fans, the bigger companies are prepared to take a risk, and you see the out area becoming more and more densely planted. And then I can't work out if that's the last one or not. There's even more. Is that one of those scary movies of the sort of transmission of a virus? And then by 2014, then right up, and that's continuing to this day. So I think if there was a slightly more updated map, you would find that those. Oh, there is one. Sorry, this is why I feel whatever. So there now, there's probably not very much more that can be planted, but they are still going in. So that's up, that Upper Wairau is where all the development is. So we were coming back off holiday, it wouldn't be last year, but the year before, and we were coming from St Arno, which is off the map, so that way. And my husband went, oh, look, there's a vineyard. And I was on the phone. I'm like, whatever, thinking it isn't because it's so far away. But then I looked out the window. I thought, oh, goodness, he is absolutely right. And so from the start of looking at a vineyard to Renwick was about a 30-minute drive. So that is just extraordinary. But, you know, they're prepared to take a risk, because if they do get frosted quite a lot, because obviously it's down in that sheltered, you know, kind of shaded kind of area, but they feel by establishing vineyards, pushing in frost fans, you know, would just have a go for it. So it would never have been viable. But nowadays, such is the demand, then people are looking at regions that they wouldn't have done, I would think, some time ago. What's the one after that, David? Ah, there we are. So that's the little sub-region one. So when you look at the top, I'm just going to have a gulp of mine. So let's go for the top. So Raorangi, you might see some wines. I think Wither Hills used to have a Raorangi Sauvignon. So that's right by the coast. So it's, again, it's slightly, you know, but sort of alternative lifestylers, shall I say, go and live out there. It's wild, and the beach is stunning, but kind of pebbly, and you know, you feel like any moment you're going to be washed out to sea by the kind of ruggedness of it all. So there's definitely some flat vineyards there that have a distinctive character. But my worry would be if there is climate change and the sea level starts to rise a little bit, you're going to probably be a bit in the, you know, stuck. If you're in Raorangi, and there's probably not much in the Wairau Bar as well. That's a very culturally significant area, because there was lots of wars and skirmishes, and I think there was a massacre. I think they now call it a skirmish, but I think in anyone's book, massacre is probably slightly more true to type, which is there. So they're out by the coast with all those things that they bring in. When you look there, so if you come down on the State Highway, Spring Creek, a little roundabout there, famously, and then Spring Creek Vintners. So that's just another sub-region, but Spring Creek and Rapara, that Rapara, which you see in the middle, that sort of square or rectangle in the middle, would be where all the, all the golden triangle, where all the impressive kind of legacy Sauvignon Blancs would come from. And then you've got, so if you've got to go all the way along Renwick Road, and then you have to go over the bridge, and that would take you to Kaituna. So people like Nautilus have got some vineyards out there. And then when you come back in again, then you've got that kind of Central Waro region. So that big square, Rapara, Central Waro, I suppose even Condas Bend. They used to have them on labels. I think when Pernod were going through a whole, let's make wine showing regional sub-characters, they put them on. Now, I'm not sure they bother to do that anymore. I think they've just contracted back into just putting the name of the grape variety on the label. You've got Blenheim, obviously, there. And then all those ones you see going down would be Waihopai, Tynesfield, Omaka, Brancott, Ben Morven, Taylor's Pass. They are all the southern valleys. So as you go along, each of them has this very slightly different character. Waihopai is the famous one because that's where the big Spy satellite. So if you've got a label, I'm sure they do import into Australia, called Spy Valley. So that's the nickname for it, because at the end they look like two ginormous golf balls sort of stuck together, and some New Zealand person was so dead set against it. I think they tried to cut a hole in one of them and climb in or something. It was great to do about the whole thing, and it was all thought of being spotted from outer space or something like that. But that's the kind of nickname for it. So the Waihopai Valley is there. Then Tynesfield is possibly not so well known. I would think that will probably be pushed into the Waihopai. Omaka is where the aerodrome is. So if you're a Peter Jackson fan, you must go to the Omaka aerodrome. There's the most amazing museum. So he's got Weta, like normally you go around museums, there's like an old plane. Oh look, there's a plane, and there's something else. But he's done these massive life-size, or bigger than life-size, people. So there's like a Spitfire that's caught in a tree, and then there's like somebody hanging out of it. It's like spooky. They're all unbelievably lifelike. But that's obviously his passion. So if you come to do the whole thing in you should take time to go to the Omaka. And then Brancott is what they've now called Montana, because when they wanted to push into North America, there was apparently quite a lot of confusion by having a wine from New Zealand called Montana. So they called themselves, and Brancott was where the original plantings for Montana were, in Brancott Valley. They built a beautiful cellar door out there. I'm not sure if it survived COVID, to be honest with you. And then Ben Morven, so Wither Hills again has got some vineyards, and Ben Morven as have other people, and then people like Villa have got Taylor's Pass. So once a year they have a sort of a Pinot safari, and everyone sort of drives up and down the southern valleys, tasting differences and whatever's going on there. So that would be, if I wanted to plant great Pinot, I'd be in those southern valleys. If I wanted to make that fulsome style of Sauvignon Blanc, I would be in the Waro. And then not forgetting now Upper Terry Central and Coastal. So Coastal's really, that's the story really of Yealands, isn't it? That is just, it's just so extraordinary to just watch, just rolling forever, it would appear. Out there around the town of Seddon. But I think you might see more sub-regional. Oh my goodness, I'm missing some out. People from Blenheim will be horrified. So the Dillon's Point is the one that I pointed out to the right of Blenheim. So normally if you fly to Blenheim, you come down, and it comes down from Auckland, and then normally it goes over Cloudy Bay, takes a sharp right-hander and zoosh, straight down the valley and lands. So you'd fly right over Dillon's Point. So Spring Creek vintners, bottle for a winery that does these sub-regional wines, and I love the Dillon's Point wines. They're normally very lifted, very kind of sea spray kind of character. And then Redwood Pass, well, the Redwood Pass is as you're about to go up and over the hill, so just before you get there on the left-hand side, where between Dillon's Point and Redwood Pass, the names on the map, that's where lots of salt comes from. So that's sort of flaky salt, looks a bit like Malden salt, you know, there's kind of gentle, flaky kind of, and that comes from there as well. So I think that's what they're trying to emphasize now in Marlborough. So it's not just one giant, you know, lumped together vineyard area, but there are distinct sub-regions as the vines get older, as people's expression of those wines becomes greater. So 9 o'clock. No, it's not 9 o'clock. It's because I won't change my computer. Because I once did it and then it was all a disaster. So we'll have a look at a couple of pictures, then I'll go and let me go and put the kettle on because I'm sobbing for a cup of tea. I took that out of play and I realised people's home photos are the last word, aren't they? Like when people say, "Do you want to look at my photos?" It really runs away and hides in terror. I thought, well, it's true, isn't it? You know, like the olden days. Like, do you look at my photos of my holidays? Like, no, I don't. But we had a flight when we had the MW trip. The Air New Zealand put on a special flight. We went from Blenheim down to Christchurch. So this is us. We've taken off from the airport and they've gone in a big loop, and then now we're going down. So what you're looking at is flying south, and the middle of the picture is that long ribboning Wairo River with the vineyards you can see on either side of it. So at no point in the past would you have seen vineyards that far up. But that just shows you really quite had distinctively, you know, those flat alluvial gravels for planting Sauvignon Blanc. That's the picture there. I think there might be one more picture, and then no, there isn't. Thank goodness for that. Otherwise, you'd be as I say, no, sorry, no one wants to see anyone else's photos. Do you want to do the climate, or do you want to do that after you've had a cup of tea?
A cup of tea and then come back.
Do you mind? I know we've only been on for a bit, but I'm 97 cups of tea light every day here. Sorry, I probably had 400.
That's okay.
Is that all right? I'll be 1 second while I make a cup of tea and then I'll come back. All right, love. So I don't want any sound. I don't want any pictures. I can't even work out how to do that. I'll turn it facing the wall. I have to face the wall. This is the problem, isn't it? I'll be traumatized by technology. Sorry, I'm going to face you to the wall for a minute. Wait, I'll make my tea. God, that's scary.
Hey,
Sorry, I'm back in the room. Only because it's how many times you said in hotels and there's no plugs. I'd crawled on my hands and knees looking for one under the desk, which was where I'd have thought if there was going to be a plug, you put it. But now I'm sitting here in the armchair. Anyway, right. So, do you want me to start again, David? Can you hear me?
yeah, ready to go.
Right. Go. Okay, so why do people like Marlborough? What is it that makes it what it is? Well, again, I just said that they had the big debate with Nelson about who is the sunniest of the regions, but Marlborough has plenty of sunshine, so obviously that's great, good for growing grapes. Diurnal variation means the difference between daytime temperature and nighttime temperature. So I'm always super envious when I come to Australia and it's still lovely and warm in the evenings. You know, you see people sitting outside and having dinner. Well, not this week, isn't it? What a weird week this is. I'm glad I brought a jumper. But normally you have a much warmer, to my mind anyway, evening temperatures, which is kind of good if you want to grow the kind of bigger, more fulsome grape variety. So things like Cabernet or Merlot, Syrah, then it's quite nice not to have a sort of warmer evening because that kind of ripening doesn't slow down. Whereas if you're making things like Sauvignon or Pinot, then it's quite nice for the preservation of acidity. So in New Zealand, even if it's been boiling, well, it's never really boiling here, but, you know, intensely sunny during the day, you might get to 30 degrees, brilliant sunshine. But the minute the sun starts to go down, it's absolutely freezing. So that's the description for diurnal variation, means the difference between, you know, daytime and nighttime temperatures. So if at night it's cold, then the vine will kind of slow right down. That means the acid doesn't degrade. It means that therefore you still have sort of firm acidity levels in those wines. It means the colors are brighter. So UV light, we have, you know, we're below, in fact, it's November and we're below the hole right at this moment. So brilliant UV normally means kind of anthocyanin production. So when I did a thing at the Mornington Peninsula Pinot thing, and there was this rather, I shan't say it because you're obviously pleasant people, but I had a couple of words about him. But he was an Australian sommelier, and he was like, "Oh, you can tell those New Zealand white Pinots because they're also sort of purpley coloured." And I felt like saying, "Well, we don't have them sort of browning and garnet coloured like yours, muchachos." But it was because that's how I think you can see New Zealand Pinot Noir, is because of that anthocyanin production. So you get, I'm not saying purple Malbec colours, but they are definitely quite brightly coloured wines. And it's and it's by the sea, so there's obviously the moderating influence of the coastal thing there. So you've got all the kind of goodies for for promotion of color, promotion of incredible aromatics, preservation of acidity, all keys to make great wine. So mountain ranges protect sun, that's fine, cooling breezes. And then, as I say, we've just gone through it. So sub-regional variations, so those stony riverbeds, which we saw in the Wairau, and then the inland drier sites, which will be the ones, you know, up into those southern valleys, drainage, clay soils, better tannin profiles, and then the sea breeze ones over on the Awatere. And it is higher, windier, cooler, you know, only by maybe a degree or so, but it makes it impacts quite markedly on the style of wines made there. So in common with lots of other New Zealand regions, as I said, those braided river systems you just saw on the picture there, with things slowing and then changing course and what have you. So the Wairau with its stony soils gives you, I'm not sure if I've got a picture of how to make Sauvignon. So, if you have a lecture from people and they were talking about making great Chardonnay, or they're making great sparkling wine, they're making great something, then normally they make much of, we handpick the fruit, we get whole bunches, we whole bunch press, we do all these, delicate things like that. We have found out that the way to make award-winning Sauvignon Blanc is to machine harvest it. Why? Which seems counterintuitive for fine wine production, because in the skins of Sauvignon Blanc grown in New Zealand, but maybe especially so in Marlborough, are things called thiols. And thiols are the bigger, riper spectrum. So when people talk about Marlborough Sauvignon being passion fruit, guava, red capsicum, those bigger, slightly riper fruit profiles, then that's a thiol influenced wine. And so if you want to make an award-winning wine, what you would do is try and drive the thiol production. And you can make precursors to thiol production kind of happen once you've harvested. If you think you've harvested the grapes, even if you have a super gentle machine harvester, there's going to be some slight tearing maybe of the grape skins, and once you've got them and you pull them all off the vine, machine harvesting them, then surely the bottom of the layer of the grapes, the bottom of the tanker truck, whatever, there's going to be some sort of squashing, and therefore you'll get grapes being crushed and juice being released. So that time that it takes for you to machine harvest, put it into a truck or some sort of receptacle, you've already started the thiol production, all these precursors being liberated. So the thing to do would be to machine harvest it and then basically drive around for a little bit, because if you did a couple of laps of Marlborough, then you'd have had really good thiol production going and you'd make that style of wine, and people love it. So you could, if you were here with New Zealand people now, they will be judging, as I've just done this week. People were talking about, elegance, purity, those lovely, slightly shy characters. And no. Every Sauvignon that seems to win a trophy in a New Zealand wine show is honkingly thiols. These big, well, we can't say armpit characters anymore because people don't like it, but we call them sweaty. There's kind of slightly sweat, fresh, not horrible sweat, not somebody hasn't been in the bath, but that kind of sweaty production. So you get that sort of, I think we have to say box hedge these days. I'm not actually sure what a box hedge is. I think it's privet. But if you imagine you've got 60 wines, 60 2023 Sauvignon Blancs in front of you, it's a bit like the squeaky wheel that gets the oil, isn't it? It's the one that jumps out at you. So things like those guava-y, so into the red capsicum, passion fruit will be another key descriptor for thiol production. So nowadays, the University of Auckland is doing loads of work on yeast that will release these thiol precursors, because that's how you can drive kind of aromatics on the wine. But in my opinion, rather foolhardily, they're now selling it. So I thought if I had something especially as Marlborough Sauvignon, I certainly wouldn't be selling to people in South Africa and Chile and all the other places, yeast that allow them to make wines that look like mine, in my opinion. So that's what I would see classic Wairau, those bigger, riper styles. In the Aotearoa, you tend to get what I would call the methoxypyrazines. So the methoxypyrazines is kind of the polar opposite. That's the snow pea, green capsicum, cut grass, that sort of lifted, slightly more floral, slightly sort of lime leaf, maybe that sort of cooler spectrum. So if you look back in time, then New Zealand, vines that are planted in Marlborough must have thought all their Christmases had come at once, because they're suddenly in these rich, fertile, youthful soils. There's mountains of sunshine. There's lots of rainfall. They must have thought, wow, this is utopia. but unfortunately, the vine likes to produce lots of leaves, so they can do photosynthesis. So if you look back in time, some of the award-winning, very early Marlborough Sauvignons would have been made from vines where you have lots of leaves. So you've got a big vine growing up, it's got hundreds of leaves on it, and the early viticulturists worked out that fruit or grapes that are grown in what they call a shaded canopy, so the fruit's not necessarily exposed to all the sunshine because there's so many leaves shading it, you get an increase in potassium, and what you end up with is these sort of greener snow pea characters, which I think are very compelling. I like them a lot. But that sort of crisper, greener side of the street. But then people were like, actually, that's what we really need to do is open up the canopy. So New Zealand was kind of the world first at what they call canopy management. So that is manipulating the canopy, manipulating all the leaves so that you then open up all the, you get airflow through, you get the fruit exposed to sunshine. So if you move it away from that shaded canopy, which were the methoxypyrazines, then you got more of that thiol production because the fruit was more exposed to sunshine and you got it slightly riper. So you've got both you've got the climate playing a feature, i.e. the Waro is warmer, and with those free draining soils that drives thiol production, whereas in the Awatere it's cooler anyway, and windier, so you get more of those methoxypyrazines. Plus you can now drive style by choosing a yeast, which some will drive the thiol production, some just methoxypyrazines instead. So it's kind of a stylistic thing, I think, at the moment. Some of the big names, the big volume producers would maybe look for some of those thiols, some of the methoxypyrazines, and hope that they got a more complex wine by looking for sub-regional variation. But it's kind of a super interesting I think it's super interesting because I think who'd have thought that yeast would be such an in-demand thing. But when obviously having just tasted, I'm sorry, I'm not awarding a wine a medal that's 15.9% alcohol. Some of them, my tongue was on fire. They were just, however massive these ones were, and glossy and ripe and luxurious, but I bet you couldn't have got through a glass of them. So they're working in Auckland as well to try and make yeast that, so when you put, sugar plus in the presence of yeast ferments, gives you alcohol. Why not have yeast that make alcohol, but maybe they make other things as well. So they make aromatic compounds that you lose to the atmosphere. You don't have to necessarily get the yeast entirely producing alcohol, because there's a way to naturally lower the alcohol levels of wine. If you could, have some sort of, estuary things that float away, there's a way to make them. Surely it's hard work drinking high alcohol wine, let me tell you. I shan't show you my tongue, which is slightly sad. So Marlborough have highly aromatic ones. We explain why, because the driving of the characters. Again, the big problem, we'll see a little bit later on when we talk about Appellation Marlborough wine, is that some grape varieties you cannot make a lot of fruit off a vine, because then you'll end up with, if you ask the vine to ripen too much fruit, it won't ripen. So things like Pinot are crop sensitive, Nebbiolo would be crop sensitive. You could increase the yield, but the vine's going to struggle to ripen it. You'll end up with the tannins not ripe, you'll end up with the fruit flavors not ripe, and it'll just end up being a slightly ugly wine. So there are some grape varieties which are super sensitive to crop load, whereas things like Sauvignon are not so super sensitive. So you can get really pretty fulsome crops of Sauvignon, but at some point you have to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, well, what, should we have a limit on the yield, or should we just make as much as we can? So that's a big debate that's going on in New Zealand at the moment, because obviously without an appellation structure, people are free to do what they want. So there's a kind of pull and push. I'm not sure if we mentioned it on the first day, but Villa Maria has been sold to a company called Indivin. And Indivin, I think, it depends who you talk to, but I think they now control 30% of the New Zealand's production. So, you've got one region making 80% of the grapes are grown in one region, 80% of those grapes are Sauvignon, and one company's controlling 30% of the production. That is really quite scary, because obviously I mean, I went to a villa tasting last week of the new wines, and they're obviously, I think, going to leave them alone to make, great wine. And it's their kind of like jewel, if you like. They're not going to touch that. But there is, you know, how much self-regulation do you have when if you could make as much Sauvignon and sell it as you can? What's to stop you, doing that? How do you self-regulate yourself? But I think that there's some interesting conversations, let's say, being had in New Zealand at the moment about that. So Wairau and Southern Valleys, yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about Pinots from those Southern Valleys, but obviously the Sauvignon Blanc grown there as well. Now, I just chose, along with Erin Larkin, who is the Australian wine reviewer for the Wine Advocate and one of our top sommeliers, Andrea Martinisi. So we had to choose our 12 wines from 2023, which would be the Appellation Marlborough wine selection for the year. And I said to them, let's abandon the word alternative styles, because unless you tell the customer what they're going to get, it seems pointless to me. It's just hopeless. So we judge them as the alternative styles and the regular ones. Then for the final 12, we just put together all the wines we liked and randomly, blind poured them, and then whatever rose to the top we chose, rather than try and say, oh, we need an oaky wine and we need a sulphide wine and we need this one. To me, unless you convey that to the customer, then it's just meaningless. It means something to us because we're wine people, but not the person on the street. Is none the wiser. So let's just abandon all that. So under the vast majority of Marlborough Sauvignon is made in his tank. It's the easiest wine to make. You just pick it, have a couple of laps of the vineyard and, you're machine harvesting it straight into the tank, maybe add an enzyme to settle it, and then rack it off gross lees, inoculate it, ferment through to dryness, let it settle for a little bit, and then probably then just prepare it for bottling, freshen it up, fine it, filter it, tartrate, stabilize it, bottle, off you go. It's an accountant's dream, isn't it? And that's what people want. I think most people like that kind of bright, crisp style. But where you're seeing alternative styles come in would be those sulphide characters. So that struck match, that gunflint. Last night we had a bottle of, is it Oak Ridge Chardonnay, these 864, that kind of flinty, struck matchy kind of characters. So people are looking for those, keeping them on yeast lees. So once the wine's finished fermenting, then rather than take it off the lees, you leave it sitting on there maybe over a period of time to get some sort of complexity from it being sitting on lees. I wouldn't say we see oak in the way that if you went to Napa, you see those big Fumé Blanc styles, which, is the luxurious oak and the vanilla and the whatever. We don't tend to make them in that style. If it's been in oak, usually it's kind of older oak. A couple of people have experimented with new oak, but it doesn't end well, shall we say that. What they've tended to do, though, is a lot of people, rather than call them oak aged or alternative, they just haven't put Sauvignon Blanc on the label. So things like Dog Point, who's one of my all-time favorite Sauvignons, would be, they just call their Section 94, or Cloudy Bays is called Tococo. If you buy it, says Tococo, it doesn't say Tococo Sauvignon Blanc on it. It's just, you have to know what's doing. So maybe slightly warmer fermentation temperatures, looking to get kind of richness into the wines or textural elements, whilst being maybe mindful that lots of people really don't care. They don't, they just want something bright and crisp and cheery and fun, and that's the end of it. We won't go down we're going to open the door, look in the room, and then shut it quickly, because we don't want to talk about sparkling Sauvignon. Yikes. We definitely don't want to talk about blush Sauvignon. I was like on the plane going to London, and I said, we've got a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. We've got a glass of blush Sauvignon. I'm like, what the hell's that? And she's like, well, I think it's Sauvignon that's had Pinot Noir put in it. Is there anything safe these days that's not pink? It's just everywhere these days. I'm like, we had the business forum in Christchurch a couple of weeks ago, but the people to keep your eye on are the Geissens. Now they are without doubt. So I think Giessen Sauvignon used to be the biggest selling wine in Australia. I'm not sure if it still is. Their Sauvignon. So what they've worked out is, so they make beautiful Marlborough Sauvignon. How much fun is that? They make it. And then some of it, they put it through a spinning cone. So a spinning cone basically spins out the alcohol. So you put it through a spinning cone and you end up with wine that has no alcohol in it, and you've collected the alcohol. So you've got two wines now. You've got Sauvignon Blanc and zero alcohol Sauvignon Blanc. But then you've got all of that alcohol. Voila! You make the world's only Sauvignon Blanc gin. So the alcohol from they spun out of the thing becomes gin. So I think there's only juniper in it, but that sells out because, classically it's got the weird bottle and everybody goes, ooh, fun times. Then the alcohol, some other alcohol they seem to get out of it. They're now making alcoholic lemonade. And anything else that's left over, they now power the generators in the winery. I thought he was going to say we have hand sanitizer, we're using it as a cleaning fluid or whatever. But I thought it's really, it fits the complete narrative for modern wine production, doesn't it? You're making a wine to appeal to the consumer. You're making a non-alcoholic wine to appeal to the people who don't want to drink. You're making a gin for all the sad gin drinkers out there who want something different. The lemonade, and we fit into the kind of sustainable model because we're powering the winery with it. What is the world coming to? Anyway, sorry, I'm going on with this. So if we keep going down, so wild ferments. But I mean, there's, if there was a pie chart. So now this is what somebody has set up, a group of people to safeguard the quality level of appellation or of Marlborough Sauvignon. So Sauvignon is the first one they've gone for. So they have rules and regulations. So they have it's got to be grown from, it's got to be 100% Marlborough fruit. It's got to be bottled. I think it's got to be bottled in New Zealand. It's got to, there it is. Thank you. It's got to be, so what they're trying to stop is wine going in these big flexi tanks, because obviously lots of New Zealand wine leaves in this 24,000, it's like a big shipping container, and you fill it, you put a plastic bag in it, and then basically as you fill the plastic bag, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it fills the entire tank. And then so you're not shipping glass around the world, you're only shipping the liquid. And then when it gets off at the other end, then you've got bottling companies in, say, Europe or Asia or wherever, they bottle it for you. So they were kind of worried about that. So the grapes have to come from here, cropped at parameters. In my opinion, I think they should have done it by saying they should have taken the German VDP model and said, it doesn't really matter about how much you're making, you've got to achieve a certain must weight. So you've got to have those grapes have got to be able to achieve an alcohol level of, say, X amount. That I think would have maybe slightly more rigorous in my book than just saying, it's a 15 tons or something like that to the hectare. And they've got to be sustainable. So those are the wines that we, not all Marlborough Sauvignon is obviously fits into this model, but they brought it in, I think, as a group of producers, because they were worried that wine was going offshore and they didn't know what was happening when it got there. So this is, if you look on that, maybe it's on the one just before, there's that kind of that little thing there, which you don't really see on the label unless you look hard for it, but it's normally around the back, squished between the don't drink, the poor old lady who's pregnant and all the other massive health warnings and the other things like that. But I'd say it's not I'm bound to say that because I judged the wines this year and chose them, but it's a really good thing to look for, I would say, going forward. So I mean, we're spending quite a lot of time on Sauvignon and Pinot Noir, but there are some awesome other wines coming out of Marlborough. So Chardonnay would be, New Zealand Chardonnay's never been in a better place. So, there's lots and lots of amazing producers in Marlborough. Again, a lot of the leading ones will be in that struck match reductive style. So, hand harvested, whole bunch pressed, full solids ferment, natural spontaneous ferments, and driving those kind of sulfide characters. So, you get that grapefruit. You don't get the kind of peach nectarine fruit. You get the red grapefruit, red apple, just right white nectarine. But oak is normally there, but quite subtle. But you do get those big struck match characters that people seem to love. Other grapes, I think today, winky, wink, wink, there may have been some Marlborough Albarino in there. There is some awesome Albarino coming out of New Zealand. So, you know, obviously from northwestern Spain, from Galicia, but it seems to do particularly well. There was a horrendous aberration when people decided to plant Gruner Veltliner, but I think there's only one place to grow Gruner, and that's Austria. I'm sorry, I will die on that hill. We had some slightly icky looking ones today again. I don't know where they were from, somewhere in the New World. But I think that for me, Gruner is all about texture and weight and richness and extract. And in New Zealand, they were just making them so they look like Sauvignon. I think there's a terrible tendency with new grape varieties, people just go, oh, make it like Sauvignon Blanc, and so you end up with this sort of cool ferment kind of style. But there is some really quite delicious sparkly wines, you know, beautiful method traditionals coming out of Marlborough. That, you know, in the past, most of sparkling wine would have come from further north. Gisborne was where most sparkling wine came from, and then as the industry has evolved and kind of refined, you see the production of sparkling wine kind of start to move down New Zealand. So Marlborough and Central Otago would be the kind of big, you know, the hero spots for sparkling wine. But they do a lot of Pinot Noir, and they get quite arsy about it because they don't nobody, you know, as we don't tell anyone you make it. You know, if you tell people you make great Pinot Noir, there's no point sitting there grizzling because people think of Central Otago. I don't know what, David, in Australia, what's got the highest profile for Pinot? If you said to a person in the street, name a New Zealand Pinot Noir region, where do you think they go?
Central Otago.
Yeah. And why is that, we have to ask ourselves? Because they get off their ass and promote it. You know, they're always doing stuff and running things, and I mean it helps because they've only got that, basically, you know, got some Chardonnay and bits and pieces, but you know the story of Central is Pinot. But there's some awesome wines coming out of Marlborough, but they just don't tell anyone. Then they get dark when everybody else gets all the, you know, all the joy, and they don't. So again, I think in Pinot, we're starting to see, you know, vine age plays a big part. So obviously older vine material now coming in, clonal selections. So, you know, the clones, we talked about that, I think last week, you know, which of the particular clones are suited to various vineyards. It's not necessarily one size fits all. So under viticulture, it's got their shoot thinning, so obviously taking off extra shoots on tons of leaves, leaf removal to open up the canopy. So the problem for New Zealand viticulture, which is why there's still, you know, but why do you see regions like sort of Spain who probably make less expensive wine, but they seem to be higher on the organic, you know, kind of percentages than someone like New Zealand, which is small and totally focused on premium production? Well, because we're humid, so it's much easier to abandon spraying and using, you know, maybe chemicals if you're in a beautiful dry Mediterranean sunny climate with small bush vines miles apart, you know, airflow, warmth, dryness, all the beautiful things we go on holiday to Europe to get. But here in New Zealand, it's a pests and diseases. It's like a nirvana being here, isn't it? You know, the huge, you know, huge fluffy vines full of leaves, and it's humid and warm. And so if you're, you know, powdery or downy mildew, what a gift straight in there. So I think that things like the leaf removal and stuff like that takes time, and you've got to pay somebody to go and do it. I was talking to a chap from Marlborough who said they've got a new sort of leaf blower that will kind of trim away some of the material, and it's got these jets, I think it's an Italian one, and it kind of blows all the material out, so it can do the work of a human much more quickly, but by sort of trimming and blowing, because then you don't get all the sort of debris and the materials were stuck in the vine. But he works for quite a wealthy winery, so I'm not sure everyone's got one of those. Probably some poor sausage is going to go out and do it by hand. And then cluster and shoulder thinning. So we talked last week about clusters, i.e. removing bunches, and shoulder thinning. If the architecture of the bunch is such that the shoulders of it are kind of almost little sub bunches, then you can cut off those two. That would therefore allow you to get more exposure of sunlight into the bunch without, if you wanted to do that, that would be a way to do it. So grapes are tested for physiological ripeness. Obviously nobody's going to pick unripe grapes, are they? But if you look at how to make wine, then obviously things like, well, de-stemming, I think, is a controversial one now. So we'll look at that in a minute. But, well, we'll look at that. So if you look at a bunch of New Zealand grapes, then often if you were to pull all the grapes off the bunch, then the stalks and the kind of structure, that the grapes are attached to, you've got to get that ripe. If you don't get it ripe, there's no point in putting that in the fermentation vat. But people have worked out that they can do things like they can de-stem it, but leave the berries as whole. There's another way to, or if you get the stems ripe, you can take all the grapes off and then you actually add back in some stems, actually physically put the stems back in again. Why would people do that? Because if you add to a red ferment a percentage of whole clusters, so not squashing all the berries and whatever, you put whole clusters in, then what it tends to do is it kind of cools the fermentation down a little bit, so you don't get these big booming temperatures, where there's a sort of tumultuous ferment, heat is generated, extraction and what have you. It tends to kind of, there's little air pockets because of the structure of the bunch and what have you. So you get a sort of cooler ferment. You don't have to plunge quite so you have to push the cap down to get it wet all the time. You might just go for a pump over, so just basically put a pipe on the bottom of the tank, open it, and then just the force will push the wine will drain through the pipe that's attached to the bottom, and you can spray it over the top. So I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, the Pinot production in somewhere like Marlborough has come on in leaps and bounds because of these techniques, which have allowed them to add more interest, complexity. It's slightly off topic, but there's a lady called Jen Parr who makes the wine for Varley down in Central Chicago, and she did a podcast on whole cluster ferments for the students, and she was like, well, some people say you just get this whole cluster character, which is a sort of cinnamon. So if you smell Pinot and you don't smell oak, but you get that real strong kind of cinnamon edge to those wines, then to me that's the whole cluster element, because that's the kind of character they pull out, those kind of compounds pull out the stalks. And she said that I know some people say that you can get sort of stemmy Pinots that detract, but she said surely the stems are coming from the vineyard. So if you wanted to make a wine that really represented your whole vineyard, you would use some of the stems because they're part of the fruit and part of everything else. But I would suggest for things like cold soaking, so what you would do is crush the grapes, put them into the fermentation vat, and you just don't let the temperature get too much. You basically soak them under maybe 7 or 8 degrees. What would happen then is that as they're soaking, you've got juice and grape skins. You're going to suck out all of the water soluble elements from the skins. So by soaking them to begin with, you get some extraction of tannin, some extraction of color. Then you gently warm up, and then once the ferment kicks in, then obviously off it goes and gets warmer, and proper extraction through alcohol. So alcohol will pull out the alcohol solvent colors and what have you. Well, those kind of techniques, if you're making a $15 bottle of wine, you're not going to spend time cold soaking or whole cluster or sort of messing up and down like that. So whenever you see people talking about using things like cold ferment, cold soak or whole cluster, it tends to be that you're going to look at a premium wine, because they are techniques really for premium wine production. So then you've got a fermentation, because obviously we want to make wine, don't we? I would say much more gentle handling now. There's definitely, so plunging is you physically push the cap down back in to the juice, because obviously the CO2 is being produced, the skins are all rising to the top, and a bit like David's heard this, I've done this lecture more times. It's like people who can't make tea. People who can't make tea just either, I can't even say the word bag, because it's such a ghastly, you know, there are some things in the world that you just think this is just breakdown of civilization. But people who use tea bags, clearly one of them. But even if you put tea leaves in the pot, you know, if you put boiling water on and leave them, the tea leaves all rise to the top, and so you don't get any proper extraction. And so then when people pour the tea out, it's like, ew. Whereas really, obviously, you take off the lid, stir the leaves, don't you? Put the lid back on again, go away for a couple of minutes, come back, take the lid off, stir the leaves, put the lid back on again. Voila, proper extraction. And so you have to do that with a red wine ferment. Otherwise, you're going to end up with all the leaves, all the grape skins stuck at the top, and you're not going to get any decent extraction of color and tannin and flavor. Also, you run the risk of the top of the fermentation, you know, the cap, you'll get kind of acetobacter, because it won't be wet, it'll start to dry out, and then you'll get kind of things like volatile acidity or acetic acid formation, which is not what you want. So you're pushing the cap in all the time to try and extract color, extract tannin, flavor, keep the whole thing, you know, going. Now, if I was making something like Cabernet or Merlot, I would probably do a plunge or a pump over maybe every 8 hours, because they're tannic grape varieties, because you know, you don't want to pour out a thin weedy looking Cabernet, do you? You want Cabernet has got a magisterial color, impactful tannins, plenty of flavor. Well, you need to get all that out, but Pinot doesn't really need that. There is obviously tannin there, but you're really looking for that acid spine that's going to drive the wine. So there's a much gentler character, I'd say, nowadays, from there. And then again, for the more premium wines, once it's finished fermenting, you can then leave it in. So post ferment maceration would be, you don't drain it off the skins once it's finished fermenting. You leave it cold or cooler and just sitting, so that the wine and the skins are together. And there's a feeling that helps to sort of modify the tannins, maybe better tannic structure, if you do that. So all of those ones there, I think for that winemaking box there, you could almost apply those to Syrah as well, because you see whole cluster in Syrah, you see cold soak. The big tannic grape varieties, I just said, you know, kind of Merlot or Cabernet, you know, nobody wants more tannin in Cabernet, so you don't often necessarily get things like, you know, post ferment maceration, and certainly not cold soak beforehand, not whole cluster that you want to get off there's enough tannin in the grapes, we don't need to do it. And I think oak as well would be, you know, the people are now experimenting with, you know, the Bordeaux barrel, the 225s is great for those more impactful tannic styles. But for Pinot, maybe you go for 300s, the hogsheads or the 500 puncheons, you know. So obviously the bigger the barrel, the less surface area to wine there is. So if you want to make an oaky wine, pop it in a smaller barrel. If you want to make a less oaky wine, put it in a much bigger barrel. Maybe older oak, you don't need it to be new oak. I don't think Pinot needs new oak. I think it looks a bit icky if there's a sort of a whole layer of vanilla or sweet spice laying over the top of it. That's my opinion anyway. I'm sure other people like the tannins, but I think in New Zealand what we've done is create some really beautiful wines which have got kind of silky tannins and bright fruit profiles. But the kind of next stage on now is going to be those wines which are possibly less fruity to start with, but have more, you know, in the tank, as it were. So they won't look as immediately enjoyable when you pour them, but they'll have slightly more tannin than they used to, maybe slightly lower alcohols, you know, 13.5 now, not 14. And that structure, which is going to drive that wine on and help you to age it. That's personally what I would do anyway. I don't know if that's the same over in Australia, David, but, you know, there's kind of less tutti frutti styles.
It is definitely moving.
Yeah. I mean, though, can I say I shouldn't say this, should I? Why am I saying this? I'm shooting myself in the foot here. It's a New Zealand blooming masterclass. But I would say that I had a bottle of Giant Steps Pinot Noir, but from Tasmania. It's called something, beginning with a W, made by Melanie Chester. That was the best New World Pinot I have had for a year. It was so good, I almost drank it all. I shared it with someone else, obviously, but it was one of those ones you were just like, this is profound wine, made in that
Jane's frozen. Is there anyone else see Jane frozen? I can't really see the screen.
Oh, hello.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there I am again. Oh, I thought I'd been cut off in my prime. You'd all gone quiet as I said to you, drink Australian Pinot Noir, and then you were like, it all went dark, and I thought, my goodness, they've all gone off in a huff now because I'm approaching New Zealand. But I think if you can find it, I'll send you the note of what it is, David. You can circulate it so you know. But I think that's the challenge for Marlborough at the moment is that they've made such a success of wine, but in that kind of very fruit-driven Marlborough Sauvignon, that's really what's carried. That's a juggernaut that's carried the reputation both of Marlborough and of New Zealand wine. So the challenge I'd say for the next 5 years is one, how do you protect it? Because obviously, if you wanted to be less expensive, you could go to Chile. That's super inexpensive. South Africa, I looked at I don't know if you remember, David, but a couple of times ago, the diploma research assignment was on South Africa. One of the D6 ones was there, and we looked at price comparisons of Sauvignon around the world, and we looked at Sauvignon. You could get a bottle in London for kind of £3.99 in Tesco's, whereas New Zealand was kind of $7 or $8. Pounds was kind of the starting price. So you've got to kind of make sure that we don't lose that competitive edge and we don't lose that special character, if you like, chasing huge volumes and all the rest of it. And I think for something like Pinot and Chardonnay is to keep telling people, hey, look, we make, oh my goodness, it's like a surprise, isn't it? I'm surprised, ta-da, with my pictures. You have to tell me, I've forgotten all about it. I'm like, but they probably want to go home. So those are the clones. So obviously the Mother Vine 6, which is on the bottom left, I think that came into Australia, MV6. And then the one next to it, which is the Able we were talking about last week, which was the one that the man brought in the Wellington boot. You call them gum boots. But you could see that people love that Able, the middle one, because it's super popular in Martinborough. Massive, it crops decently, but if you restrict the crop, you get wines of colour, wines of flavour, and wines of tannin. But you can imagine what a viticulturalist horror story that middle bunch would be. Because if you got a, downy mildew in the middle of that bunch, it would be rampant before you knew it. Tightly packed, dense architecture of that bunch. Once you look at, so Ontave is the research station in Dijon. So most of the clones would come from Ontave. So you can see somebody said to a research scientist, listen, mate, we like the Able, but we're getting these problems with mildews and stuff. It's so dense. And they're like, right. So the next iteration is to go to the right. And you can see there, those are those shoulders we were talking about, like the little, the bits coming off. It's longer, it's more slender. And so if you thought, well, it's struggling to ripen all the season, you can see easily snip off those two extra little bunches and ripen the rest of the remaining fruit. Normally, the bigger the number, then the more recent it is. So I think that's 10 bar 5, isn't it? The one we've looked at there. And then once you get, you've got because let's face it, wine people are just a laugh a minute. So there was 777 and 667, so they call them the Boeing clones. People are falling about laughing at this. It's just terrible. And then 828 and then 943. So it's not just Pinot, they make Chardonnay. You might hear people talking about clone 95 or clone 5 or something like that. I think 948 is the one that everybody likes at the moment. But you can see, so if I was making, I know William's a big fan of Asherangi, so they like Able because they're super premium producers. They can take their time, make sure that the Able is ripening. But if I was making an inexpensive Pinot Noir or a Pinot to make sparkling wine, then I don't need all those tannins. I don't need all that structure. So I might choose one where it gives you heightened aromatics, slightly bigger yield, because obviously color is not going to be important because you're making sparkling wine out of it. So this is the kind of evolution of these clones, and it seems to be most important, or people are most concerned when it's single varietal wine. So things like Chardonnay, you can see the clone. Pinot, you can see the clone. For things like Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc blends, it doesn't seem to be so. so insightful. But that would be those clones there. Put me out of my suspense, David. Are there any more? Oh my goodness! Then you're zooming down, and then there's other moments in the sun. So we talked about the same thing for the climate, and then we said about the gravelly and then the clay-based soils on those southern vineyards, and then they put a red fruit spectrum, raspberry, cherry. But see, that doesn't sound very fun, does it? Red fruit, raspberries, rhubarby moments, fresh and sun, linear structure, and even tannin. Who wrote this? Oh, I know who wrote it. New Zealand Wine. What a load of piffle. But no, I mean, I think you'd have to go by style, not necessarily just that overarching thing. There are lots of brightly fruited, minimal oak, juicy, fruity wine that just doesn't age. But people go into a restaurant, they want a glass of Pinot. It's not that expensive. But at the other end, those lower cropping ones of places like Southern Valleys with tannin, darker fruit characters, well-ripened tannin, structure, ageability. I mean, all Pinot Noir here would go under screw cap. Oh, there might be a couple of slightly bohemian producers who, still clutching to the hideousness that is natural cork, which we know we would outlaw, having had a couple of honkingly corked wines this week. Why? I just don't know. I mean, save the cork for the Bordeaux blends, save the cork for the impressive age-worthy reds, and make sure they're not cork taint. But when I see aromatic white wines under cork, you just like, anyway. The world's a strange place, isn't it? I think at the moment, anyway. Oh, it is, Dave. Don't lie. I mean, imagine somebody has paid a certain amount of money to put their wine into a competition, sent 6 bottles from the other side of the world, and they're corked. You just like, it justifies belief that people would still do that. But anyway, we're not. So, are we any more, or have I finally shot my bolt?
That's the last one.
Is that it? Okay, so the homework for next week is everyone has got to come with a bottle of wine. I'll be repatriated with my cellar rather than sitting in, I don't know where I am, in the middle of nowhere. No, I'm not. I'm kind of in Chinatown, which is actually quite a lovely place to be. And William, I was very mean to you when I said I didn't know where Concord was. What a neat place that is.
I live in the same area.
I know you said last week, it was just, what a neat little place. I went for a walk up and down the main street today. Those are little restaurants and fun times. It's a bit of a, well, I was going to swear. It's a bit of a to get to at 7:00 this morning in the taxi. But once you get there, what a neat place that is. So I'm enjoying that very much. But I think I'm near Chinatown where I am here. Well, you all have to bring a bottle of wine. So next week we're going to swoop majestically through North Canterbury, North Otago or Waitaki, and then finishing with the mesmerizing jewel that is Central Otago. Do they have an exam, David? Have they got to prepare for that?
Sorry?
Do they have an exam?
They have an online quiz. So they need to read the content, complete the online quiz, and submit 3 tasting notes from some wines that they've been consuming, preferably New Zealand wines.
Well, yes, I would think for a New Zealand wine course, we don't drink anything else. So do you have any questions for me, Marcel or William? Anyone want to say anything? You had enough of me. I've had enough of me today.
Jane, is it possible that you could somehow send through potentially maybe some classic varietal flavour characteristics for each of the particular types of regions that potentially put up on Moodle? So it's a reference, say, example, as you described some today, especially for Marlborough, etc., like obviously, but if you can go through each region, that would be fantastic. Just some key points for regions to be able to identify.
So do you want it done like, New Zealand Chardonnay, from Gisborne it's peachy, from here it's that, or do you want it Gisborne, it will be peachy Chardonnay, slightly woeful looking Pinot? Oh, it is. Oh, sorry, I can't. I know my pom-poms I can wave them and shake them for New Zealand wine, but I'm blinking Gisborne Pinot Noir.
I don't know, just like Gisborne Pinot peach, blah 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 blah. If you're to maybe not so premium, but it will have this type of characteristics or flavour profile. Typically
this, that, and the other. No, not a problem at all. No, happy to do that. It might not be until after the weekend because I've got 20,000. Is that all right? 20,000 words to write on the Abstracting tasting. I've written about 3. 3 words, not 3,000 of them.
Your time in Sydney.
No, I'm having such a fun time. I can't tell you. I'm going to go for a wander around now and try and find something to eat because I need to go to bed early because I start again at 7:30 tomorrow morning with a very interesting, as a side note, I know you want to go, but a very interesting thing. So they had lighter bodied red class and they had a fuller bodied red class. And we had a fierce debate over what classifies lighter bodied and fuller bodied. Is it fruit profile? Is it alcohol? Is it grape variety? Because somebody had entered a Nebbiolo into the light bodies. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a weird one. Surely we're taught that Barolo and Nebbiolo are kind of fuller bodied red wines. Do you know what I mean? So I think tomorrow I've got another honking, it can't be any more than 15.9% Malbec, can it?
Hopefully not.
Well, hopefully. Oh, my mouth's on fire with these things today. But anyway, very sweet of you. And thank you again. I apologize for being stuck with the Ayrton Senna of Uber drivers. He was just like, oh, if he changed lanes anymore, I was just sobbing in the back of it. Like, oh, please get me there by 6 o'clock. Not realizing he'd take me at my word. It was like, I was like, ah. But that's
really great to catch up again. Enjoy your find some beautiful food. There's heaps around Haymarket in Chinatown.
Oh man, I'm off. I did who? Well, the thing I've worked out is I know this is a New Zealand thing, but sherry and Chinese food. I don't realize by saying Chinese food, there's hundreds of thousands of them with loads of different ones. But we did Hunan, William. I don't know where Hunan is, but Hunan cuisine and sherry. I don't think I've met a better match. There you are. The take home, Amontillado and Chairman Mao's red pork. God, I'm starving. Even think I might go back again, but it's just delicious. But anyway, all right. Good night, all of you, and I will see you this time next week.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, David.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.